It's really an honor to be here. I would like to thank the management for this invitation and also putting circularity finally on the list in production engineering cluster or manufacturing cluster. Mahesh and Lena, so you will have to be a bit lenient with me on time. I do not have a good reputation on that. But anyway, I will try my best. I have to run through 28 slides in 20 minutes. So that's so it's basically resource constraint, right? So that's what we are discussing. Just before I start my presentation through the slides, a comment or a remark that about 10 years back, when me and my team started on this journey of, let's say at that time, we were calling it more closing the loop of manufacturing by design, which later become circular manufacturing. So we wanted to convince few of the people, maybe not those who are today in this hall, but from this arena. And I found it quite challenging because I've realized that maybe the ideas are too radical for the time. And it seems like it has taken about 10 years now that we have this topic on the list. And that gives me a lot of, let's say, pleasure here that finally this community, which I personally think is the most important community in the industry to actually take on to this topic. And we will see why, for example. But I would also like to say that hoping that although it took 10 years to get the message through, but we will not move further with this speed, right? Because we don't have really that much time available. Anyway, so starting with my first slide, and this is me saying this, and if you agree with me on this, let's say 100%, because I want 100% alignment here. If you agree with me, all of you, 100% on that, we can already directly move to my last slide, which actually is the most important slide. But I know that not all of you will agree, probably, or maybe partly. So let's go through this journey of communication, I would say. So it's circular economy-driven transformation in manufacturing. And with my background in production engineering or manufacturing industry, that's where the focus has been for all the research we did on this topic for the last 10 years. And the agenda is rather brief. I would say that if you would ask me, my last point is actually the most important point, and I would love to jump directly and start discussing, but we need this let's say, communication here. So let me put the things. I think you have heard a lot about, you have seen numbers, you have been given statistics, you have been also given, a lot of insights into how, for example, different technical solutions are being developed so that we can get circular. And I don't want to, let's say, burden you further with statistics, but few, and this will be the only slide that from me will be on statistics, and then we move on more on the conceptual part of it. So let's see. Sustainability, so just trying to put the challenge in the perspective. So this is what we see as in the linear economy. And I think you're all familiar with these numbers. So we have serious challenge with resource consumption, and the forecast is not really very sustainable, right? We don't really have that number available on the planet in going towards 2060. Similar is the case with solid waste management. So we have issues. We are already having huge challenge in dealing with what waste we get today. I mean, more than 30% of the waste, we do not even know where it goes, right? Let alone that we are able to handle it. And for 51 billion ton already, we are touching the number on CO2 emissions. And think about going to 70 billion. And with this 51 billion today, so we already are saying that we will not be able to stay below 1.5 target or whatever we say. And the consequence of all this, actually, which usually doesn't get the sort of limelight, is the biodiversity loss. Very seldom discussed in detail or for example, with the intensity that it requires. And that is actually that our material needs, for example, extraction, processing, and use, that has actually caused 90% loss so far in the biodiversity. And just let's keep in mind that we are part of that biodiversity on the planet. Yeah, being on the top of this pyramid, maybe we don't really feel the heat now, but ultimately we are standing on it, right? And why, for example, the root cause? Well, very obviously the economic model, and that's why we are here today, right? So producing more, consuming more. Do we have the need for it or not? It doesn't really matter. I usually say economies of scale meant damage of scale. That's what we have. I know that it could sound very, let's say, pessimistic, that, for example, our economies of scale have brought a lot of wealth and probably brought millions and billions out of poverty as well at the same time. But we could have done it a bit better if we had known what sort of damages we are talking about. Anyway, keeping this in mind, so this is also my view that, yes, we did damage the ecosystem, and we have damaged it significantly. But we were doing business, all right? We can recover or regenerate it as well, doing business. The point here is that we just need to do the business in a different way, right? And that's what we call the circular way, right? And I at least am convinced, and I think some of you sitting here are definitely convinced that the way forward, so being us the only ones on the circular planet, being, linear, doesn't make sense, right? So we have to find another way. Now, the idea here is that before we are getting into, the nitty-gritty of, let's say, circularity down for implementation purposes, we have some homework yet to be done. And that homework is to actually, all of us, at least have a common language or semantics, or we understand when I am talking about circular economy and you are talking about circular economy, we understand each other, right? And I can tell you, as it happens with any emerging area or any emerging field, we are struggling with that. 10 years down the road, when the first, for example, report came out with the buzzword, and please note, I'm calling it buzzword intentionally, circular economy, when we read the report from Ellen MacArthur Foundation 2012, down the road 10 years, we are still struggling. And particularly in research and academia, we have confused the things further, right? While doing the research, and of course, it's part of the process. There's nothing really unusual, but let's try through this session. I will use few slides, and after that, I hope that at least the people in this room will actually be able to speak to each other, that yes, this is circular economy. So 3 fundamental principles. Eliminate the waste and pollution. So we want to move towards a society or a system that is free of waste and pollution. Now, many people have been talking about, minimizing waste in circular economy. I am not there. I'm not with them. So we are talking about eliminating waste and pollution from the system. Circulate, close the loop. As I said, we are the only one practicing linearity. No other natural system actually is based on principle of linearity or open loop. And then regenerate. Not much emphasized, but as I said, this is the part that is getting more and more critical because we have damaged our ecosystem over the years going into this all hasty development. If we zoom in to the circulate part, so circulation also has to consider a few important characteristics. And the characteristics are that we, of course, need to close the loop and as good as possible, right? But we do not want these loops to operate, in a mad way at a high speed. We want to slow down. So while we want to circulate, we want to lower the speed of circulation. That's important, right? Because we can very easily destroy or continue damaging the environment and our ecosystem, even if we are just, maintaining closed loop for our resource scarcity, right? And then narrowing, use the inner loops where, for example, the material requirements are minimum, right? That means that you should continue using your resources at the highest possible value. And that is what becomes critical when we want to work with these inner loops, which I think you have seen the diagram, but butterfly diagram, I'll bring it up later. And then we move forward and we come to the so-called inertia principle, right? It's our colleague Walter Stahl, who is a very well-cited and very well-read researcher on circular economy. So this is a very operational or very, let's say, what we call hands-on part of the circular economy. And that's do not repair what is not broken and do not remanufacture something that can be repaired. And do not recycle because it can still be remanufactured. And there's the principle of the inner loops, actually reinforcing the narrowing part of circular economy or circulation. So putting all these three together, I think this is the familiar diagram that you have seen several times, right? But I just dissected that diagram so that we can understand and we can communicate with each other, okay? Now, circularity as a system is what we want to focus. Because if you read this slide, so it's still not stable. So you find it's actually, for example, this loop with maintain, prolong, reuse, redistribute, refurbish, remanufacture, recycle, and also part of it is repair. So all these terminologies are part of the linear economy as well, isn't it? Anybody who has never heard of, for example, repair or remanufacture or refurbish or recycle before? No, all of us know that. So why suddenly we are taking a different view on that? Because they were around in the linear system as bits and pieces, right? But they were never put in as a system. And that's exactly what, for example, this diagram is trying to do, or at least the circular economy push is trying to do. So if we try to look at the manufacturing, particularly focusing on that, so just having a quick look at one of the problems, which is actually the waste. So we can find that there are elements of circularity already in the linear environment, right? And we have the possibility to actually move forward building on those, right? And that was the idea when we started working with circularity in the manufacturing area. that we have a lot of sound ground or sound foundation that we can just start working on and building further. If we give a quick look to the very, let's say, common view of our linear manufacturing. So we know that, oh my God, this part, So this is typically where, for example, OEMs focus, most of them. Few maybe focus on this part as well. I mean, when I say, of course, you produce everything with user focus, but probably users are not part of your system, right? And when I put a line here for a focus, so I mean users being part of the system, right? And what we did is that calling this approach of closing the loop by design or by intention. That means that we would like to look at the total system, starting from the design of the product, moving on from manufacturing, and then bringing, at the end of the day, users being part of the whole system. Right? So, and it's very easy, to look at this picture and associate ourselves with all these, terminologies and say, well, yeah, there's nothing new in that. There is new just this part that we want to build it as a system, right? And of course, this brings us to some challenges, right? And these challenges, I'll not go through all of them. I just put them, as for you to go through. But let's say we have challenges, technical, economic, and cultural, right? And at the same time, we have opportunities as well, right? So this is something that we need to maybe discuss in a separate, let's say, session. But I put it here so that we can just have a record of what we need to work on. So while working for our research, so what we did was, we went into this concept of circular manufacturing system, and we wanted to create this framework so that we can structure and simplify moving forward, right? In parallel, we also developed what we call the circular value management model, right? So we want to take, rather than just the resource perspective or maybe just the energy perspective, we want to push the value perspective. And then we started talking about mapping these four important areas of the framework, right? And that's where we have heard about, I think, most of them, not much emphasis on this part, but I heard a lot about this product design and manufacturing, not much on the supply chain networks and ICT. I think ICT I heard a bit when we were talking about 4G and 5G challenges. But let's say, if we just look at the value proposition, it's always a challenge when we are talking about circularity. But we do provide at least a framework where we say, okay, here is a space. Either you can go for transformation or you can go transition, right? And if you use the path of transition, so we have the possibility to look at this picture that tells you that, okay, you don't jump from sales to service, but there are midways as well. Circularity gets complex, right? And putting it on this value model, you will see that your suppliers will have to actually get along with you on that. But linearity is also complex, right? So the complexity discussion, I usually say just embrace it, because that's what the challenge is about. And we have been taking on these challenges earlier as well. So there's nothing really to be scared of. When we talk about the information management part, I usually say that if we had to do this transition or transformation 2 decades ago without all the technological developments on the information management, information acquisition side, I would say the circular economy implementation wouldn't work. But today, we take the advantage of this and we say, we know that already there are lots of efforts happening. So this is a work from World Economic Forum, Internet of Materials, where we are talking about keeping track of both physical material flows and information flows. And we are suggesting that at the OEMs level, we will have to create intranets of what we call circular products and materials. I know Lena is waiting. Give me 5 minutes more, I'll try to conclude it, right? Because these are important slides, so we started actually a bit. Now, let me see. Since we do not have really the practical examples, or typically people come and say, do you have an evidence, right? Well, I can tell you there are lots of evidences in the linear environment, right? Just look at, for example, a lot of companies, already doing this after-sales service business. You will be surprised that a larger part of the manufacturing companies, especially in the heavy engineering sectors, they earn more from their what we call maintenance or after-sales services packages than you earn from. Look at, for example, the car industry. They play on margins when they are selling cars, but they earn a lot of money when they are maintaining them through the spare parts. That's their main business. So I don't know if you know, the main business of the car industry is not really selling the new cars. It's actually maintaining them, using them, right? Okay, so we wanted to create evidence. We said, no, we don't have any evidence of circular economy, all right? So we started modeling the systems. We created scenarios, and we said, yeah, look at this example we took from one of our European projects that we did a few years back. We concluded it now. Here, we thought, okay, let's take a value proposition model and model it in a way that we could basically emphasize on the use over life cycle. 100 washing machines over the period of 15 to 20 years, because they are long-lasting products, can serve 700 customers, right? So this is what we call decoupling from resource consumption. And if we go into the details of this system, so we can, of course, do a lot of analysis on that. You can look at, for example, the cost streams over time. Let me run fast. So life cycle costs, we can look at the life cycle revenues, and it's important. In circular economy, you will have to think about life cycle revenues, right? It's not something that you actually got a product, sold it in the market, got the money home. Well, it's a utility-based approach. It's a utilization-based approach, right? And there are two types of costs you know better. It's basically both the cost-based and utility-based value that we talk. And then it's environmental performance. We can go into the details. And the most important part, in my opinion, that is the profits over lifetime. All right? After the break even, you have a lot of opportunity over a very long time that you can actually earn money. So it's utility that we are trying to focus, right? And this is actually not a new, let's say, wisdom. It's at least 2,500 years old. That the wealth is in the use, not in ownership, right? So if you would like me to keep, points to ponder, well, produce less, use more. Creative but regenerative. That's a problem that we are having. We can be very creative, but if we are not regenerative, it's going to be a problem. We have been collaborating to compete in linear economy. Circular economy requires us to compete for collaboration. And that's, I think, the most important change that we will need in our thinking, in our mindset. There cannot be a better venue than this one. And this was my last slide. Setting up a national hub for circular manufacturing systems could be an idea moving forward from here if, let's say, we think where we should go next. Thank you very much. And sorry.